And what's actually going to end up happening is that nobody's going to have a whole lot of trust in Anthony Fauci or whoever the next Anthony Fauci is.
You can't handle the truth.
What's going on, wonderful people? It's Jay. Thanks for tuning in. You know, myself and others try to, educate people the best way we can with stuff that's out there, nothing secretive that we have like knowledge, but the evidence that's out there that's talked about constantly. But people always want to fit in, and I came across people that want to eat shit, even family members. But I'm going to get it because I want to go on a cruise. I want to get co-workers. I want to get it because I want to go to concerts and stuff like that. You can get it. I didn't get it, and I'm going to be able to do all of that. You can still do these things, but they know that you can't wait. You know that if they throw it out there, they want to see if you bite. You bit.
Coronavirus!
Now you're stuck, literally, in the arm, but not the wrong arm that Dr. Fauci got his stuck in. And he couldn't even tell which arm he got it stuck in because he felt the pain in the other arm. But we're not going to go there. But did he lie?
Good morning. We have a great show for you today. Glenn Greenwald, Dr. Joe Pesci, and Team Rising, they're all here. But let's start first with the big story of the day, at least if you're not one of the corrupt folks over in the legacy media. It's a big story. We're going to be talking about Dr. Anthony Fauci's FOIA emails that came from BuzzFeed, that came from the Washington Post, who did the legwork on this and filed those FOIA requests. And now I think we have a better picture, really, of what was going on behind the scenes in the early days of the pandemic, at least in regard to Dr. Anthony Fauci, who was scheduled to be on this program with us today. We previewed that yesterday. He had a scheduling conflict, we're told, and is rescheduling for next week. So we'll see how that goes in the coming days.
Yeah, we'll see about that. No, and so the week, it's an interesting media story too. The week after Memorial Day is what's known in our industry as a very slow news week. It's almost always extremely slow. And what they mean by slow is that they have to find like a train that derailed somewhere and or find a car chase if you're out in California and they just watch a car being chased by police for an hour or so, or they get into celebrity news or something else. They have to, produce something for people to watch. What it could allow you to do is look at a story that ought to be in the news and dive a little deeper into that. And what could be kind of more important than trying to figure out what caused this pandemic so that perhaps we can do something about preventing the next pandemic, unless it's already on its way and there's nothing we can do about that. So let's do the one after that and try to prevent that one from coming around. So let's talk about Dr. Fauci's FOIA'd emails. Which ones to you jumped out as the most interesting?
Yeah, there are so many, and obviously there are literally thousands of them, but the ones that stood out to me obviously were the ones that related to the gain-of-function research, and even, something as simple as what he was talking about when it came to masks. Now, Senator Rand Paul has been doing a little bit of a victory lap, because you may remember he had a contentious exchange with Dr. Fauci in the Senate a couple of weeks back. So he's tweeting out, "Told you," with those eyeball emojis. "Can't wait to see the media try to spin the Fauci FOIA emails." And you know what? Honestly, Fauci went on Nicole Wallace's show as all of this was unfolding yesterday and got a really soft interview. She didn't even try to spin the emails. She just kind of ignored them.
Right. And, there's no feeling in public life greater than "I told you so." So I guess we can't begrudge Rand Paul a kind of petty victory lap at this point. But this is an extremely important issue, and he does appear to have been more right than wrong, and Fauci seems to have been more wrong than right, and seemed to have been obfuscating at the time. Fauci about a week ago acknowledged that, hey, it could have come from this lab. But if you look at his exchange with Rand Paul a year ago, he's not allowing for that possibility in a similar way. Let's play the.
Dr. Fauci, do you still support funding of the NIH funding of the lab in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, with all due respect, you are entirely and completely incorrect that the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute
Do they fund
of
Dr.
Virology.
Barrick?
We do not fund.
Do you fund Dr. Barrick's gain-of-function research?
Dr. Barrett does not doing gain-of-function research, and if it is, it's according to the guidelines, and it is being conducted in North Carolina, not
You don't think
in
inserting
China.
a bat virus spike protein that he got from the Wuhan Institute into the SARS virus is gain-of-function?
That is not.
Okay, so he's not doing it, but if he is, it's like O.J. Simpson.
Right.
Listen, if I did do it, I didn't, but if I did, let's play. Rand Paul is he's now calling for Anthony Fauci to be fired. He's not alone in making those calls, but here's what he had to say in the wake of the email releases.
Well, I think we've had a sea change of opinion. Everybody left of center was saying this was a conspiracy. No way could it have happened in the Wuhan lab. Now even Dr. Fauci is saying that we should investigate it. But the emails paint a disturbing picture of Dr. Fauci from the very beginning worrying that he had been funding gain-of-function research. And he knows it to this day, but hasn't admitted. We have to get Democrat counterparts that will actually use the committee hearings to investigate this. But so far, it's been such a partisan support for Dr. Fauci that he can do no wrong. But really, there's a lot of evidence that he has a great deal of conflict of interest, and that if it turns out this virus came from the Wuhan lab, which it looks like it did, that there's a great deal of culpability in that he was a big supporter of the funding. But he also was a big supporter to this day of saying we can trust the Chinese on this.
Right, so let's take a look at what we can learn from Fauci's emails that have been released here. So there's a February email in which he's talking about the origin of the virus. February 1st, he writes and he says, the paper you sent me says the experiments were performed before the gain-of-function pause, but have since been reviewed and approved by NIH. Not sure what that means, since Emily is sure that no coronavirus work has gone on through the P3 framework. She will try to determine if we have any distant ties to this work abroad. So distant ties could be that they're funding a researcher whose work involves gain-of-function work in this lab, and that doesn't seem to be in dispute anymore. So Fauci in February was saying we need to explore this, but even the idea of exploring it at the time was verboten and considered to be a conspiracy theory. And for people who don't know, gain of function means you take a virus and you manipulate it so that it is more deadly and more contagious. And when people hear that, they're like, "Wait a minute, how about we don't do that? Like, how about that?" So when he's talking about when Rand Paul's talking about a conflict of interest, does Fauci have one here?
Yeah, I mean, I think he clearly has a conflict of interest. I think the email, again, a conflict of interest is a great way to say how he's tied up in all of this, because the emails, again, show that this was an issue that he was dealing with as he was also weighing in and, talking to all of these powerful people. That's another thing you see in these emails is how many people, powerful people that Anthony Fauci was in the ear of in these early days. And that's why we had, one of these very, I think, harmful narratives about the origins of the pandemic pushed for over a year, and a lot of stuff just sort of smothered, at least from public conversation, about where this came from and what role we may have played in it. It is looking, as we put the pieces together, like we may have had a distant role in doing that. We may have been funding some sort of researcher through some sort of grant that came from our giant bureaucracy that makes these things difficult to track, and that, of course, I think, is a conflict of interest.
And let's set aside the specific question of whether or not U.S. dollars went into specific research in this lab, and let's talk about the bigger issue. And so the Australian recently reported that Anthony Fauci in 2012 had made the case that even given the conceivable risk of a pandemic from gain-of-function research, that the benefits of the research outweigh the risk of that research. So that is Fauci's stated position.
Right.
And in fact, that has to be your stated position if you support this this type of research. And what's kind of newsworthy in his paper that the Australian read and reported about is that he's saying, look, what we have to be clear with our critics that what they're saying is rooted in some reality, that there is a conceivable risk that this research will lead to a pandemic. He's saying it is our job as public health officials to acknowledge that fact. Now, that was easier to do when nobody was reading his scientific paper in 2012 than it was to do when that risk manifested itself as an actual pandemic. So now the burden is on the scientific community to explain to the public why, given that they acknowledge that there is a risk that that somebody will get infected, it will lead to a pandemic, that this research is so valuable that they still have to do it, and they don't want to have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I think is most obnoxious about everything that we're learning from these emails is that there is, you go back to Fauci in 2012, as Ryan just mentioned, and he's saying something very different because it's not a charged environment and it wouldn't make him look as bad, right? Like it's not as inconvenient for his own reputation and for the country, et cetera, et cetera. So he was openly saying what he still probably openly believed just about a year ago, that this...
Still today, probably.
Probably today, right. That this research is essential, the risks outweigh the potential costs. And clearly, I think we found that needs to be reevaluated. And it's the same thing when you look, we can put his email about masks up on the screen because this is another thing that like really, really is infuriating. And I imagine it's going to hit the public in the exact same way, that Fauci was talking about masks in a different way when it was less politically charged, just like gain of function research, that like, hey, we know that the masks are really only useful if you're sick and trying to prevent somebody else from getting sick. And then he spent the better part of the year, supporting these state mandates, supporting federal guidance on masks and whatever it was, where he was singing a totally different tune about the necessity of masks, in that it wasn't just about preventing other people from getting sick if you're sick, double mask if you're not sick, mask if you're vaccinated, et cetera, because again, the public is just too stupid in their eyes to use these things correctly and needed to be basically babied and told false information. And that's what's happening with the gain of research thing too. It's just like, listen, I can get away with saying something different because I'm not being called out on it. And that's where you have these like stark black and white differences in what Fauci said then and what Fauci said now. And I think it just comes from a position of, frankly, this arrogance that he's going to be able to get away with it.
Right, and he sent this email to Sylvia Burwell, who was actually Obama's Health and Human Services Secretary, at a time when he was telling the public that, don't worry about masks. And he has since said that the public health community was being deliberately misleading to the public because they didn't want there to be a run on masks. We don't know how many people listened to the scientists, listened to the public health officials, didn't wear masks, were themselves infected and didn't know it, and went out and infected other people, who then caught the virus, infected other people, and many of those people died, or they suffered miserably, or they're still suffering long haul effects from COVID. Instead of what he could have done, which is say, look, this is the truth. We don't want there to be a run on masks. We need the masks for our first responders. If you have a bandana, whatever, we need a national project to produce masks as fast as possible, because obviously they are effective and useful for a respiratory illness. Why do you think people have been using them for decades? Like, of course they work. Why do they use them in hospitals? And so instead, like you said, he just kind of obfuscates. And
I would have loved to put these questions to him today, and unfortunately he had to schedule. Right, next week, we'll see. But again, these would have all been good questions to put to him today, because instead of going on Nicole Wallace's show where he got a softball interview, this would have been, I think, a really helpful conversation to have with him about, explain the discrepancy, and are you now worried about the fact, we talked yesterday on the show about the case of bird flu in China. When the next pandemic pandemic comes along, it could be in a month, it could be in 2 months, it could be in 2 years, it could be in 20 years, there will still be a crisis in public trust in institutions because of some of those decisions Anthony Fauci made. He thought they were in the interest of the country and the public because he had a very low opinion, seemingly, of how the public was capable of receiving and consuming this information. And what's actually going to end up happening is that nobody's going to have a whole lot of trust in Anthony Fauci or whoever the next Anthony Fauci is when this comes along next time, because they know that they were lied to. They know that they were given false information last time. So why are they going to cover their face cover their face in masks and put them on their tiny little kids for soccer games in the future, even if it needs to be done then?
As they say on social media, do better, people. I don't want to have to listen to Rand Paul for my public health advice. Don't put me in that position.
Money!